Okay, I see Mathilde is now also here. That's great. Mathilde, do you want to quickly check your microphone or?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yeah, great.
I can hear you.
Okay, I think then, yeah, we can start the webinar as well. Great that everyone's here. Welcome to everyone, also to our attendees. Thank you for joining our webinar today. My name is Nils Heuer. I'm working at United Nations Environment Program, and I'm mainly coordinating the One Planet Network Consumer Information Program that is organizing the event today. And we want to speak about three key messages for consumer information on plastic packaging. Yeah, and this is hosted by UN Environment and Consumers International. Next slide, please. So first of all, just a bit of housekeeping. You're all muted during the presentations. We have a couple of speakers later in the event. And if you have any questions or comments, you can use the chat and question functions to reach out to us. Also, if you have technical difficulties. And about the event today, the agenda that we have. So first of all, I will give a bit of an introduction, also presenting the Consumer Information Program, a little bit of background, and the Can I Recycle This report that we've launched last year. That's kind of the foundation for the work that we've done around plastic packaging and consumer information. And then I will hand over to my colleague Nishita from Consumers International to present the key messages that we developed for businesses, governments, and standard setters and labeling organizations. And then we hand over to our three experts today for their comments on the three papers that we developed. And finally, we'll have a bit of a panel discussion and also the possibility to take some of the questions that you're sending in during the presentations. Next slide, please. So yeah, just to introduce everyone that's going to be speaking today. I already introduced myself. Yeah, and then Nishita Choudhury from Consumers International. She has been leading the development of the key message papers and also supporting us in the Consumer Information Program. And then we have Alexandra Phillips from Systemic, Antonia Beeks from Fundación Chile, and Mathilde Crepe from ECOS as the other experts that we want to invite to comment on the three papers that we developed. Next slide, please. Yeah, before we go into the topic, I just want to give a little bit of background on how this work was developed. So as I said, I'm coordinating the Consumer Information Program, and it's one of 6 programs set up under the One Planet Network, formerly known as the 10-year framework of programs on sustainable consumption and production. It was set up in 2012 at the Rio +20 conference to accelerate the shift to sustainable consumption and production and kind of implement or work towards achieving Sustainable Development Goal 12. Next slide, please. And yeah, the Consumer Information Program is led by 3 organizations. That's Consumers International, who we also work with very closely on the topic of plastic packaging, and then the Federal Ministries of Environment from Germany and Indonesia. And our objective is really like to strengthen the provision of quality information on goods and services, and also develop effective strategies to engage consumers in more sustainable consumption. And we want to improve the credibility of sustainability information on products and services. And yeah, this program is open to all types of stakeholders. So if organizations are interested, they're always welcome to reach out to us. Our email address is ciscp@un.org, and we also have a website where you can find more information about all the different work streams and work areas that we have. So plastic packaging is one of our focuses in the last 2 years. Next slide, please. And now I'm coming to the report that we launched last year in May 2020. And it's titled, Can I Recycle This? A Global Mapping and Assessment of Standards, Labels and Claims on Plastic Packaging. The report was developed by Consumers International and the UNEP and focused on on-package communications to consumers about the sustainability of plastic packaging. So yeah, focused on labels and claims and the standards and certifications behind these claims and labels with a global geographic focus. Yeah, and next slide, please. Just a little bit on the methodology that we used in this report. So basically, we first did a mapping to identify standards, labels, and claims on plastic packaging, categorized these, and found like different types of categories. So basically, compostability, biodegradability, and recyclability were the main groups, but also recycled content or bio-based plastics, ocean-bound plastics, like an increasing number of different claims being made about plastic packaging in terms of their sustainability. And that was then developed into a comprehensive catalog, and we then consulted a group of experts, 33 different experts on consumer rights, packaging, labeling, and standards, also largely drawn from our Consumer Information Program network, to ask them to assess these labels and claims against, next slide please, against the 10 principles that we, or 5 fundamental principles that we developed previously in the Consumer Information Program in our guidelines for providing product sustainability information. It's one of our key resources that we are trying to advance or advocate for in the Consumer Information Program to improve sustainability information. And when we assessed especially the labels on plastic packaging, we found that a large number of them did not really receive very positive scores from our experts. So we saw that there's a lot of room for improvement. And that's now what we kind of try to achieve or advocate for. And next slide, please. Yeah, basically in the report, we then came to draw 5 main recommendations and conclusions that we proposed, and these are that businesses should follow the guidelines for providing product sustainability information when making communicating on plastic packaging, that definitions about the content and disposal of plastic packaging need to be harmonized at a global level, and that standards, labels, and claims need to better reflect actual conditions. Sorry, I think I have a little bit of feedback. If you could just mute yourself for a moment, Nishita. Thank you. Yeah, and then the third recommendation was standards, labels, and claims need to better reflect actual conditions, and the fourth, that the use of the chasing arrow symbol should be restricted to indicating recyclability. And the final recommendation that we had was that informative and verified recycling labels should be adopted and the proper use enforced. And then basically in a follow-up to these 5 recommendations, we decided to go a bit more into detail regarding the actions that the different stakeholders can take. So mainly, of course, governments, businesses, and also standard setters and labeling organizations, and try to break down really like actions that can be implemented to improve consumer information on plastic packaging. And now I'm handing over to my colleague Nishita to give a bit more detail about these key messages.
Thank you, Nils, and good afternoon to everyone, or good morning, depending on where you are. Thank you for joining the webinar. So I'm Nishita Choudhury, the Sustainable Consumption Program Assistant at Consumers International, and I assist in the coordination of the Consumer Information Program. I'm really pleased to be joining you here today, and we'll be taking you through an overview of our recently launched key messages for businesses, governments, and standard setters and labeling organizations, including the practical action points and key findings. And we're also very proud to be joined by a range of speakers who will be sharing their insights on the messages, and I will introduce each of them later. To provide a little background, the findings of the Can I Recycle This report, published in May 2020, highlights that work is needed to improve communications about materials, production, recyclability, and disposal of plastic packaging. These newly launched key messages provide action points around each of the 5 recommendations as in the report, and were refined through an extensive stakeholder consultation process that included focus group sessions, several expert one-to-one interviews, and further online consultations with our program members, with experts from across the globe in government, businesses, civil societies, consumer groups, and the standards and labeling organizations. We know many of you have joined us on the webinar here today and would like to extend a thank you for your help and participation. The key messages provide practical action points for businesses, governments, and standard setters and labeling organizations to help each improve the landscape of sustainability communications on plastic packaging. On-package labels and claims and the standards that guide them are a critical element of consumer communications, especially for reducing leakage and contamination. I am now going to begin with our key messages for businesses. These key messages were developed to assist business leaders, encourage business action and collaboration to improve consumer information and encourage a more circular economy for plastic packaging. Next slide, please. So our first key message is for businesses to adopt consumer information tools that are fully aligned with the principles of the guidelines for providing product sustainability information, hereafter the guidelines. And as Nils mentioned, this is a report that was launched in 2017 by UNEP and the International Trade Center with fundamental and aspirational principles on how to provide trustworthy and effective sustainability information on products. In all of our key messages, we advocate that these principles are adhered to provide effective sustainability information on plastic packaging. We identified in our report many instances of information and imagery that cause consumer confusion and mistrust, from the use of the chasing arrows design for labels and claims other than for recyclability, or communications that are not localized and therefore not actionable for consumers. Forming partnerships can help to develop localized communication for plastic packaging. The Australasian recycling label is supported by the Packaging Recyclability Evaluation Portal PREP, which assesses each piece of packaging against the number of people that can recycle it via their council collection. And the imagery on pack is consistent. The recyclable, conditionally recyclable, and the not recyclable is separated visually, which helps consumers to recognize the labels and understand the recycling instructions. This meets the principles of collaboration, clarity, relevance, and accessibility as in the guidelines. With an increasing amount of consumer transactions occurring online, consumers often do not know if a product packaging is made from plastic, whether it's reusable, or how to dispose of it. Businesses need to inform consumers about the packaging used and their sustainability ahead of purchasing. For instance, the Packaging Star label in New Zealand is a label not printed onto packaging, but shown on the websites of grocery and brands, and lets consumers know which packaging is made from recycled materials, which packaging can be separated, and which brands are committed to improving their packaging, thereby helping consumers to make better informed purchasing decisions whilst online. Next slide, please. If consumers have a better understanding about the concept of the circular economy and hierarchy of different solutions proposed to tackle plastic pollution, this can encourage behavior change towards more effective solutions and increase their responsiveness to labels and claims on plastic packaging. Packaging can be redesigned to facilitate reuse and recycling, and this should be clearly communicated to the consumer through labeling or further digital information. In 2019, the restaurant company Wagamama, in response to consumer feedback that not all UK councils can recycle black plastic, redesigned their takeout packaging from black to grey and communicated that the plastic bowls can be reused through the slogan, "When you're done, I rinse, reuse, recycle." Businesses can also collaborate with governments to run campaigns to increase awareness around what certain labels and claims stand for, or do this as part of their marketing efforts. Business action through better educating and informing consumers alongside labeling and other communication efforts will help guide consumers in the marketplace and increase their responsiveness to sustainability information on plastic packaging. Next slide, please. The following key messages aim to assist governments to improve and promote consumer information on plastic packaging and to progress towards a more circular economy for plastic. Next slide, please. Sustainability information on packaging is barely regulated, leading to a great variety of communication with different levels of credibility. This can cause consumer confusion and mistrust even towards credible consumer information. Governments can regulate to ensure that consumer information available in the market is aligned with the principles of the guidelines to prevent consumer confusion and mistrust. Firstly, consumers presume that on-pack labels about disposal are relevant and applicable to their local waste collection. But this is not always the case. The Ellen MacArthur Foundation defines that a packaging or packaging component is recyclable if it is proven to work in practice and at scale. Governments should aim to collect annual recyclability rate data in their country. This can help companies to utilize information in labels and other consumer information tools and ensure any recyclable claim is accurate and locally relevant to consumers. Member states of the Basel Convention will start to report data on plastic collection and recycling rates from 2022. Additionally, legislation can help to tackle misleading communications. Two examples identified in the Can I Recycle This report is the green dot logo and the outdated but still widely reused resin identification codes. Both use the chasing arrows in their design but do not indicate recyclability for consumers. This is a problematic but fairly widespread practice. In 2013, the resin codes were updated from a triangle of 3 chasing arrows to an enclosed triangle. legislation should be updated to enforce the use of the new enclosed triangular design, and Oregon has become the first state in the US to propose such a change. And in France, it is no longer mandatory for the green dot logo to be used. This can help to reduce consumer confusion and better enable the correct disposal of plastic packaging. Next slide, please. Improper use of labels and claims can also result in greenwashing. Regulating against this will mean improved practices and communications from businesses on plastic packaging. The US Federal Trade Commission, FTC, and the Green Marketing and the Australian Consumer Law have developed guides as a response to false business claims. Furthermore, regulations which set definitions for common unpackaged sustainability claims would reduce greenwashing and the use of terms that consumers find confusing and difficult to compare. In February 2020, France approved a law on the circular economy, which forbids companies from using the word biodegradable on packaging unless they can prove it is suitable for domestic composting. This will mean improved practices and communications from businesses on plastic packaging, leading to less consumer confusion, better comparability of claims, and empower consumers to take the right action. Next slide, please. Governments can promote campaigns that inform consumers on the content of labels and claims and the actions they should take. For instance, highlight what a misleading claim is and how consumers can report these to relevant bodies in their area. The government of Rwanda have been raising awareness among local businesses and consumers on the benefits of using recycled plastics to strengthen the circular economy. And since 2019 in Brazil, Sao Paulo's Town Hall Initiative campaign, Recycla Sampa, structured upon the 5 R's rethink, reduce, reuse, refuse, and recycle, has been encouraging sustainable habits among citizens. Repeated awareness-raising campaigns targeting consumers to understand the sustainability information displayed on plastic packaging will encourage them to tackle greenwashing and help consumers to contribute towards a more circular plastics economy. Next slide, please. The following key messages aim to assist standard setters and labeling organizations to promote clear communication and action for consumers that can help them to make more sustainable consumption choices and understand how to properly dispose of plastic packaging. Next slide, please. Harmonized definitions used in standards and consumer information labels to ensure a consistent landscape of standards for claims on plastic packaging. As mentioned previously, a definition of recyclability should refer to its application in practice and at scale. Examples of waste recycling labeling schemes which incorporate local accessibility data of waste collection facilities can be found in Singapore, South Africa, the UK, Australia, and New Zealand. Labels on pack which reflect the local conditions will help increase consumer trust and proper disposal of plastic packaging. Additionally, in most countries, the required systems for composting do not exist at scale. There is a risk that plastics which are technically compostable or biodegradable are not treated in this way and may leak into the environment. Classifications around sustainable packaging could be clearer and international standards set which ensure composting and biodegradation do work in practice and at scale. A new British standard for biodegradable plastic has been introduced, which hopes to standardize confusing legislation for consumers. And biodegradable products meeting the standards will contain a recycle by date to ensure consumers have disposed of the packaging before it starts to break down. Next slide, please. The assessment of the Can I Recycle This report showed that only 19% of assessed labels give consumers quality information to make informed recycling and purchasing decisions. Developing labels which adhere to the principles of the guidelines report can help to create a more consistent market for consumers and decrease consumer confusion. In addition to the key messages, we have developed 5 case studies of good examples of labels on plastic packaging, which support consumers in their purchase, use, and disposal. The labels, which you can see on the screen, have been identified as good examples as they align with the guidelines' fundamental principles: reliability, relevance, clarity, transparency, and accessibility. For example, WWF South Africa's on-pack recycling label's use of the chasing arrows only indicates recyclability and recognizes that most packaging has more than one element of composition with different implications for its recyclability. And the logo for reduced packaging in Singapore supports businesses in reviewing their packaging designs and provides consumers with products with reduced packaging, which is clearly communicated on the label. On-pack labeling does have its limitations in terms of availability of space and possibilities to share information with consumers. Standard setters and labeling organizations can embrace scannable digital technology, for example, barcodes, QR codes, to build on-package communications and provide further sustainability information to consumers. Digital technology can support on-pack labeling by expanding outreach and providing additional information on recycling guidance and proper use and disposal of plastic packaging to consumers. For instance, the Bearpack app in Singapore enables consumers to choose Bearpack's reusable containers when choosing takeaway in-store or for delivery via the app. This can then be returned in person or to any partner restaurants. This aligns with the principles of transparency, accessibility, and multi-channel and innovative approach, and increases progress towards sustainable solutions for a more circular economy of plastic packaging. However, the local context in terms of access to digital technology must be considered, and the fundamental information should be accessible to all consumers offline as well as online. Next slide, please. And now I would like to welcome our guest speakers who are experts in recycling, plastic packaging, and consumer information in general. So first off to Alexandra Phillips at Systemic, who is going to make some comments from the business perspective on our key messages for businesses. So Alexandra, welcome, and over to you.
Thanks so much, Nishita. And can you hear me well?
Yes, I can hear you.
Great, thanks. So I'll start by giving a bit of context around what I work on. So I work for a company called Systemic, which is a systems change company that partners with business, finance, and policy makers to work towards creating more sustainable economic systems. I'm based in London, and beyond Europe, we also have offices in Brazil and in Indonesia. And our work is split across 3 priority systems, which are regenerative land use and oceans, clean energy, and materials and the circular economy. And I work on the materials and circular economy platform with a particular focus on plastics. And I'm sure everyone is very familiar with the details of the plastics crisis we're facing that's been so increasingly reported over the past few years. And as a result has become an increasingly important topic and consideration for consumers. And our mission at Systemic on the topic is to work towards stemming the tide of plastic waste. So this means reducing our use of plastic, and for the plastic we do use, making sure none of it ends up in the sea or on land as waste. And to this end, we run both research projects and on-the-ground work, which is all about translating the theory into action and taking a sort of broad community approach to ensure that all stakeholders are included in the solutions, which of course includes engaging with consumers and civil society, who have a critical role to play. And some of you may be familiar with a report we launched with the Pew Foundation last year called Breaking the Plastic Wave. And the main message of the report is really that while in a business as usual scenario, we would see the flow of plastic into the ocean tripling by 2040, we also already have the solutions from technology to policy to investment to achieve a future with around 80% less annual plastic leakage into the ocean. And the report also sets out exactly what those levers are that we can achieve that. And all of the sort of some of the key perspectives and levers have already come up, and we'll hear more from the other speakers, because solving this crisis really needs government, business, the NGO sector, and civil society to work together and enact the changes that each of those respective groups have the power to make, and to make those changes in a coordinated way. So as part of that sort of theory of change, over the past sort of 14 months, I've been working on a project with the Consumer Goods Forum on plastic waste, focusing on what the consumer goods industry can do to play their part in solving the plastics crisis. So really focusing on a set of targeted initiatives and areas of things that are within those consumer goods companies' control to change. So it's a group of nearly 40 major retailers and manufacturers, and the objectives of the project are very closely aligned with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation's work, particularly using the targets set out in the EMF Global Commitment as a sort of North Star for our coalition objectives. And the key messages for business in the report are really relevant to this. So a really key priority this industry is to meet their recyclability and recycled content targets, which many of them have committed to achieving by 2025. So there are sort of two parts to this. Many of them committed to using only plastic packaging that's recycled in practice and at scale. And second is a commitment to increasing the use of recycled content in plastic packaging. And businesses are well aware that consumers are a really key part to achieving this. So first, it's because consumers are a critical piece of the circular economy puzzle. They're the ones who, once they've bought the products, then sort that rubbish and their household waste and send things off to be recycled or to their sort of end of life. So to meet their targets, businesses really need to equip consumers with the right information to make sure that that packaging does actually get recycled, because otherwise using technically recyclable packaging becomes meaningless if that sort of final stage in the process doesn't get completed. And second, businesses really want to be able to communicate sustainability information to consumers to show, for example, that a piece of packaging includes recycled content. And they need to do this in a way that's credible and clear and in language that makes sense to a consumer who's not in the detail of all of this, which can get very technical. So the key messages that you have really hit the mark if companies want to achieve those two things in an effective way. And it's really helpful to have those set out in a sort of globally applicable set of principles. And yeah, it's really key to empowering consumers to make informed decisions about what they buy based on sustainability, and find a way to sort of cut through the noise of the currently extremely wide range of language, imagery, and certifications to get this information across. And second, yeah, it's really key to increase circular literacy among consumers, and absolutely a priority so that businesses can ensure consumers play their role in the recycling system and dispose of packaging in a way aligned to circular economy goals. So I'll then just close by saying that while this is definitely something that's really high up on businesses' agenda and something they're actively working towards, it's definitely not without its challenges to deliver. So what the system really needs is an approach that is harmonized at the highest level possible. So that's where these sort of globally applicable principles come in and can be really effective. But it also needs to acknowledge the very different needs of different markets. So that might, be about needing a tailored approach to communicating with consumers in certain places, or it is also about acknowledging that there are very different recycling infrastructures in different places around the world, and information about recyclability, both for instructions and for sort of informative purposes, needs to reflect that. And for multinational businesses, that's a real challenge to roll out in an accurate way. So it's essential that business action is coordinated with action from other stakeholders for real impact, and particularly with regulation that can really help to ensure sort of efficient and harmonized action.
Thank you very much, Alexandra. Great to hear we're aligned on our approach and to hear your perspectives on our key messages for businesses. And now I would like to hand over to Antonia Biggs, who is the director of the Chilean Plastic Pact at Foundation Chile, to make some comments from the government perspective on messages for governments. So over to you, Antonia, and welcome.
Thank you, Nishita. Well, I would like to say first that I'm very honored to speak about the government key messages that you have written down. I was for many, many years a public official. I am not anymore, but I used to work at the Ministry of the Environment. I now work at Fundación Chile, which is a public-private partnership. And so if we get right into what we want to speak about, to regulate and ensure consumer information available in the market is aligned with the principles of the guidelines. I will go through some of the progress that Chile has done in the last few years that is pretty remarkable, and I wanted to share with everybody, because if you go through the key messages for governments, we have done progress in almost every key aspect. So the government has now an initiative called I Choose to Recycle. I can send you later the website. And so it is a label that helps consumer identify the packaging and the highest content of recyclable material of this packaging, and how to recycle it and where to recycle. So this is pretty aligned with what is said on the key messages, right? To have on pack labels about disposal, especially in your local waste collection scheme, which Chile is now under an EPR scheme law, and so this is very linked, and it helps the consumer, right? So this provides a clear information to consumers and promotes recycling in the circular economy. And this label called I Choose to Recycle is part of a clean production agreement. So it is led not only by the Manufacturing Development Society, but also the Ministry of the Environment and the Agency for Sustainability and Climate Change. And there is what is interesting is there's also a validation committee. So the consumer can be at rest knowing that there's people involved in ensuring the success of this project. And behind this, just to name a few, there's the National Consumer Service and the Association of Sustainable Consumers of Chile, right? So that's one example I wanted to give. And of course, I also would like to speak about the Chilean Plastic Pact, because in that sense, we thoroughly went through the guideline for providing sustainable information, and we did our own communication guide so that we would have like a common communication about plastics, right? And I would like to set out that the Chilean Plastic Pact does have, or since it is a public-private initiative, it does allow for dialogue with all the actors of the plastic value chain. So that's really interesting, because we have that, and that's part of your key messages also, right? The dialogue that needs to be set out. So the Plastic Pact resolves this in some way. And we have done, like I said, this communication guide that has, of course, a glossary. It has explanation of life cycle plastics in Chile, main processes of circular economy, and a whole chapter regarding the guidelines. So we did this for our members, but also for the public in general, but especially for our members, so that we could speak sort of the same language about plastics. And as for your key messages regarding organized education campaigns, we also did an online digital campaign of the 7 R's. So it was stories about Chilean people, common Chilean people, that aimed at raising awareness among citizens about their role in the plastic value chain. So it's 7 little videos that you can look through in our website regarding reflect, reduce, redesign, reuse, repair, recycle, and recover. And as regarding your key messages on how to tackle greenwashing effectively, I would like to mention that our National Consumer Service has an annual inspection plan, which they monitor green advertising. So this is really interesting because, well, green advertising understood as advertising that declares ecological qualities or social or environmental sustainability. So this is contained in the consumer law, which is something that was also mentioned previously, how to link this to regulation, right? I will not go through all the details, but the mechanism used to control these matters are inspections of websites, social networks of companies, and their advertising in the press, and information requirements, especially to request if it's verifiable, what is published, the information that is published. And some actions that have been done lately is audits or information requests done by citizens regarding something that was said by businesses. So this green advertising inspection is expressed in the current inspection policy So like I said, this is really, really interesting regarding regulation. And this inspection policy is published on the institutional website, of course, of our National Consumer Information Service on its website, so that all the companies can know it, but also citizens can know about this in general, right? So as you see, I went through almost all your key messages with what has been going on, but I would also like to say that it is essential to have these instances of dialogue or public-private roundtables where we can speak about this and be aligned and work through different projects or guidelines so that we can implement them. Of course, having certain regulation. In Chile, we have, like I said, the inspection policy. We have an EPR law that is in effect now, and that will have soon a decree regarding also packaging. And so targets will have to be met about recycling there. So the companies are nowadays also being forced in a good way to speak to each other and be prepared, right? So set the scenario about how will we do this to meet the targets, the recycling targets. So it's very interesting what's happening right now in Chile, and I wanted to share that with you, all the public-private initiatives that have been going on in the last few years, and that I see that are very well aligned with the guidelines. Thank you.
Thank you, Antonia, for sharing your perspectives. It's great to hear. And last but not least, we have Mathilde Crepe, who is the Senior Program Manager at ECOS, and who is here to share perspectives on our key messages for standard setters and labeling organizations. So Mathilde, thank you for joining us, and welcome. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Nishita. Can you hear me well? Great. So good afternoon, good morning, everyone. My name is Mathilde Crepe, and I'm a Senior Program Manager at ECOS. For those of you unfamiliar with ECOS, we are an environmental NGO with an international network of members and experts, and we advocate for environmentally friendly standards and environmentally friendly policies. So we are not a standard setting organization as such, but we do participate very much in the development of standards on a whole lot of different sectors, including on standards for plastics and standards for packaging, on aspects like recyclability, reusability, refillability, compostability, or on standards that establish methods to calculate the recycled content or the bio-based content of plastics. So yeah, on the recommendations and the key messages, I would really like to express my full support to those recommendations. They're very, very useful for us to also to bring to standard setting organizations and labeling organizations whom we work with. So thank you very much for that. I would like to bring three main points and main reactions to these key messages. The first one being about the need for standards to better take into account and reflect real life conditions. So which relates to the first recommendation to and the first key message to standards writers. It's really crucial that indeed, you know, the standards better contextualize the recyclability of plastic packaging. So we've already mentioned that plastic packaging should not only be technically recyclable, but should actually be likely to be recycled thanks to infrastructure being widely available in the area where the plastic packaging is placed on the market. And that need for standards to be able to reflect real life condition is, I would say, a constant ask from civil society organization. Some of you might recall the Dieselgate scandal when it was made public that CO2 standards for cars were not at all reflecting real use. emissions and real life conditions of cars used. And so basically, thanks to that scandal, new methodologies were implemented which much better reflect real life emissions of cars, and so should updated methodologies assessing recyclability, compostability, or refillability of packaging. So I very much welcome this first recommendation, and we will be working towards these better methodologies for sure. And a second message or a second point that I would like to make connects to the recommendations on making labels informative. And this is a key message for, well, a message that I would like to bring to labeling organizations, that they have a responsibility also to really focus and only label or indicate what makes environmental sense. So green labels which do not constitute a significant environmental improvement compared to the status quo should not be advertised as environmental breakthrough. So, for instance, a couple of weeks ago, I came across a plastic beverage bottle, which was bearing a biodegradability mark on it. When you know that actually most beverage bottles are already mechanically recyclable and widely mechanically recycled, which is preferable end-of-life treatment than biodegradation from an environmental and circularity point of view. So it is really crucial that labeling organizations also do feel that responsibility to really focus on those substantiating those claims that make environmental sense and will not result in lowering the environmental baseline. And the third and last point that I would like to make in reaction to those key messages is a potential additional action that could be added to your action plan towards standard setters and labeling organization, which could be undertaken by civil societies such as ECOS, and which would be providing standards writers, labeling organizations, and why not to companies as well, a sort of wishful thinking checklist for all kinds of claims that you can make or that can be made on plastics and packaging. So for instance, to consider that a plastic is industrially compostable, we, in our wishful thinking list, we could say that it should only apply to markets where there is sufficient infrastructure to properly compost and infrastructures in terms of proximity and in terms of capacity. That it should also take into account actual condition and in particular the time frame foreseen for that type of polymer to compost and be put and be compared to what is actually the practice in composting facilities, that it should test that products are also compostable after their normal use. So for example, there are lots of compostable diapers on the market, but in practice, only part of it is compostable because the product is contaminated after use. We should also ensure that that compostability characteristic is likely to lead to environmental benefit, which relates back to my second point. And for instance, that composting, the composting characteristic enables to collect more easily organic waste, and in turn leads to environmental benefits. So such wishful thinking checklists could be, I think, very useful for standard setters to get a direction of travel for future iterations and revisions of their standards. And this is, well, an additional action that I would like to I would like to propose to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mathilde, for providing further insights into the key messages. Great to hear your thoughts. And we can progress to the next slide, please. So we're now going to spend a few minutes with our speakers with a discussion on how different stakeholders can play a role to improve the landscape of sustainability communication and prevent consumer confusion within the landscape of labels and claims on plastic packaging. And we've already had quite a good discussion already on this. I would also like to encourage our participants on the webinar to use the Q&A function for your comments or questions, and given time, we will highlight a few. So to start off, I'd like to open up the discussion with the more general questions on what step you're taking individually to improve consumer information and to reduce the consumer confusion currently on plastic packaging. If I can start with Alexandra, perhaps for your input on this.
Sure, and try to speak closer into my microphone because I understand that's a little quiet before, so hopefully this is better. So on improving consumer information, I think there are two priorities for businesses here. One is really making sure that the information is accurate. So this means businesses need to engage with expert associations or sort of independent third-party groups and take input from the recycling industry itself to make sure that instructions or information they include are actually accurate and reflect the reality of the waste system. And that is something that the consumer goods industry is actively working towards and is a key part of the work we're doing with the Consumer Goods Forum. And second is about working towards a more aligned approach, so that different brands, as far as is possible, use the same language and imagery and standards. So again, a really key part of this are independent organizations and initiatives operating both at national and global levels. But a challenge that remains and is something that this industry is sort of grappling with all the time is about striking the balance between what alignment is possible at the national versus a global level, and to what extent you can have harmonization and consistent language and information for consumers, whilst also acknowledging the different needs of different markets.
Right, thank you. I'm just going to turn my attention to the Q&A. I see a few questions have come in. I think one particularly for Antonia from Fabio Apprecio, and they're asking, is it possible to share more details about the work made in green claims? If you've got anything to add there, Antonia.
Yes, it's all, since it's public information, it is public to anyone. So I can share with you, I don't know if it's right away on the chat or somewhere else, I can show you where this is published. And like I said, this is a work specifically done by the National Consumer Service in Chile. So whatever reports they do, they have to put them up and it's visible for everybody. And what is also visible, so you can take a look, is the inspection policy, right? So I can send you the link. You let me know if I do it on right on here or somewhere else. And just would like to say regarding the questions in general, like I said, we do have our own communication guide that we did as a Chilean plastic pact to have the same common language on plastic, which is essential because we were all speaking, it seemed, different languages about really general concepts. So this was a breaking point, and maybe if I could add something that is not on here, but it's very important regarding what governments can do is surveys, and I know one might think surveys again, but surveys to know what are people thinking, why are people not doing this or doing something else, which is behavioral economics, right? So if you take certain surveys, you will might find what's happened in Chile is, why don't you, for example, recycle? And it's a lack of habit. So that says something about behavioral economics that we should work through, at least government side and even public-private initiatives like the ones the pact that we have to start dialoguing about this also, which is not essentially on the key messages, or we haven't talked about, but I think it's pretty essential, and how consumer confusion is being addressed. Well, I think the can I recycle this, which is a question that was brought up also. One thing is to encourage people to separate their waste, but what if we could move a little bit forward regarding packaging recyclability? And I think for Chile, and I'm speaking only for Chile, that is going maybe 10 steps forward. First, we need people to recycle. So that's the first key step, and then we can go into more technical concepts with citizens in general. But what is key is businesses and government also have, we should have the same communication language so that we are all clear. And then if we have to apply public policy, we have the same concept and use the same concept, not to confuse citizens. I don't know if I'm being clear enough, but that's what I wanted to say regarding the questions and some of the ones I saw in the chat.
Great, thank you. And yeah, feel free to drop the link in the chat, and others we can also follow up. But yeah, on the topic of technicality, we have a question here from Margaret about how does the requirement for the Mobius loop following arrows to be used only for recyclability fit within the ISO standard 14021, which uses the symbol and a number percentage for recycled content. I don't know if Mathilde would like to add any insights here, or even Nils, this particular question.
So I knew that this would be assigned to me, but unfortunately I don't have any answer, and I'm not even sure that I understand the question.
Sure, Nils, would you like to? We're assuming ISO.
Yeah, I think I'm also not quite sure if I fully understand the question, but I imagine like in the ISO standard, it's kind of using the chasing arrows also in the context of recycled content. And I guess in our recommendations, we want to move away from that, because we think the difference between recyclability and recycled content is not always clear to consumers. And I think it's important, even though of course recycled content is the result of a recycling process, but I think it's very important to distinguish between the two and make clear that we have only one symbol, the chasing arrows, for recyclability, and then we need to find another symbol for recycled content, which is also, I guess, yeah, it's a different thing. It's basically just a material that is being used, while the other is an instruction on the disposal, and those are very different things that consumers should be able to distinguish more easily. I think that's our view.
Great. And a more general question on the key messages themselves. I mean, from here, of course, we're raising awareness, but we also want them to be taken forward more broadly. So any inputs on how the key messages can be implemented? Mathilde, I'll throw this question to you first.
Sure, I think so. The organization of international and multi-stakeholder groups such as this one is definitely the right way to go, because this is where you will be able to target all the different audiences that you have targeted so far. So that's a very generic answer, and also focusing the work on working also with governments can be a very powerful way to go. So I wanted to move away a little bit from the standard setter hat and standard setting organization discussion for a bit, and talk about an initiative that's taking place at EU at the moment. So it's a regional initiative on empowering consumers for the green transition, and it's about making green claims more reliable, more harmonized, and making sure that consumers actually truly understand the green claims on the products when they buy those products. So I think working with those regulatory bodies whenever they are also making the legislation on better information to consumers is really something that could be a very effective way of implementing those, of having those messages implemented. The research is very valuable that you and it should be really taken on board for future legislation, such as the EU upcoming legislation.
Great, thank you. I think we have time for one more question, and initial question here from Miria is that a package that is collectible does not necessarily mean that it is recyclable. It is good to encourage consumers to separate their waste, but do you think this is also important to educate them regarding packaging recyclability, or the concept is too technical? Alexandra, if I can come to you on this question, if you've got anything to respond with.
Sure. Well, maybe I'll start by saying that a sort of a massive aim, target that's included in, EMF global commitment, and that other companies have made more independently, is towards achieving packaging that is 100% recyclable. So almost looking to kind of circumvent that issue by ensuring that all packaging that's put on the market is able to be recycled. In terms of sort of before we get to that stage and what's communicated to the consumer, I think it definitely is feasible, and I don't think it's a concept that's too complex, or at least that, it's an absolutely essential part of ensuring the circular economy works, is to ensure that the right packaging gets recycled. So when we're thinking about how to make that happen and how to engage the consumer, you just have to be very careful about the language that's used. And that's why, standardized imagery and language is so key, because I don't think it's an issue or challenge that can really be ignored. We've just sort of got to work through it. And you already see in many countries that it does work quite effectively, and consumers are well versed in, which bin to put things in, or even have deposit return schemes in place. So it's definitely possible. It's just about a very careful and sort of tailored approach to making sure that it's sort of as easy to understand for consumers as possible.
Right. Well, thank you all for engaging in this discussion and for submitting your questions in the Q&A. We will aim to follow up in an email with any remaining questions that we were not able to answer today. And we can go to the next slide, please. So the key messages and case studies are available for free download on the Consumers International and the One Planet Network website on our Consumer Information and Plastic Packaging Hub page. We'll put a link to this in the chat shortly. All outputs of the Consumer Information Programs is plastics work will contribute to the One Planet Network-wide Plastics Initiative and be presented at the United Nations Environment Assembly, 5th United Nations Environment Assembly. And we really encourage you to share the key findings and messages within your networks. I would now like to pass on to Nils to close the webinar, and a thank you again to our panelist speakers for sharing your perspectives, to everyone involved in the development of these papers, and to everyone who has joined us today. And over to you, Nils, for any final comments.
Yeah, also just to thank all our speakers and yourself, Nishita, and of course all our attendees also for sending in those interesting questions and the good discussions that we had today. I think we all agree that there's a lot more need for collaboration between businesses, governments, and standard setters to advance in this field, and of course also to be aware that we are only talking here about the consumer information on plastic packaging. Of course, there's a need for a lot of more solutions along the entire value chain to really make a change in how we produce and consume plastics and go towards a more circular economy of plastics. So thank you all for joining us today, and yeah, you're welcome to get in touch with our program, of course, and reach out to us if you have any further questions or comments or want to engage with us. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye all.